Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Occasionally, a parent will share with me that their adult child doesn't want to forgive them for the mistakes they made in parenting. And I think I understand from the parent's point of view why that would seem to be the case. Estrangement often feels on the receiving end like something is being withheld, something that might be easy enough to give, but the adult child just doesn't want to. And yet, knowing what I think I know about forgiveness, the idea that the adult child doesn't want to forgive the parent seems to me possibly an oversimplification, and I'd like to dive into that a bit today. I'll begin with an analogy from horticulture. If you've ever had an orchid, you know that they don't always bloom when you'd like them to. Some orchids rarely bloom at all, if ever. A long time ago, I opened my home for a few weeks to a friend who was moving out of her apartment and needed a temporary place to stay. She moved in with a suitcase and her orchid, and she placed it out of the way under a window in my hallway. Well, my friend was stunned to find that it started producing flowers almost immediately. She told me it hadn't bloomed in years. I think it hadn't bloomed since she first got it. But she said she suddenly understood that her orchid had not been refusing to bloom. It had been unable to bloom all those years. Apparently, the conditions that orchids need in order to bloom, whatever those are, were not met in the orchid's place in my friend's old apartment. But randomly, in my hallway, conditions were sufficient for that orchid to finally burst into blossom. Which brings me to the question, what are the conditions we humans require to be able to forgive? Well, I wrote about those conditions for psychologytoday.com, and I will link to that article in the show notes, which you can find at reconnectionclub.com/134. In brief, I proposed that there are 3 conditions that make forgiveness easier. The first one is a good apology. But please note, not every unwillingly estranged parent needs to apologize to their estranged adult child. In certain cases, an apology might be necessary before the adult child can experience a feeling of forgiveness. A second helpful factor is a good outcome. If your adult child is doing reasonably well in spite of any parenting mistakes you feel you made, it may be easier for him to forgive you. If he's still struggling because funding was withdrawn for his education and he never got a degree and now he can't find work that earns a living wage, that's a harder case. But if, say, your child survived a withdrawal of funding and has a good job and is doing okay financially, then any hard feelings are not being kept alive by continued financial suffering. So a good outcome is a condition that may facilitate forgiveness. The third ingredient is one for parents to pay particular attention to, and that is an end to the offending behavior, whatever it was. If I called you a name, a terrible name, a few years ago, and I ask you now for forgiveness, it's going to be easier for you to let bygones be bygones if I don't keep calling you terrible names from time to time. As another example, parents and grandparents of adult children who identify as trans often make the mistake of affirming the gender on the child's birth certificate and or refusing to use the child's preferred name or pronouns. And I'm not talking about unintentional mistakes. Those are inevitable with change and they tend to diminish over time. But systematically overlooking the adult child's preferences in favor of family preferences would be an example of not meeting the condition of ending troublesome behavior. It's hard to forgive something that keeps happening over and over. Ideally, the behavior should stop first. But that can be more tricky than it sounds because some problematic behavior can take different forms. And so you might not always recognize it as behavior that's problematic. That's why in my book, Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child, I talk about unearthing themes instead of just particular incidents. If there's a theme of invisibility, say, then anything I do that makes you feel invisible, you will consider repeating offending behavior. Whether I call you by the wrong name, or I seem not to know something about you that you feel is central to who you are, or if I forget your partner's name, or I take you to a steakhouse for dinner when you're a vegan, all of those are different behaviors, but the theme is the same. I'm not seeing and acknowledging who you are and what matters to you. So because there are so many different ways that behavior can play on a theme, ending problematic behaviors can be a challenge even when you really want to. Another subtlety about forgiveness when it comes to estranged adult children is this. Your child may already have forgiven you, and you just don't know it because the relationship hasn't resumed yet. What can look like a refusal or unwillingness to forgive may in fact be a fear of getting close and then possibly having to estrange again. Feeling afraid to re-engage can look like refusing to forgive. From the parent's point of view, forgiveness equals resuming contact. From the adult child's point of view, resuming contact is a very big deal because if it doesn't go well, they may have to leave again. And we know from research that estranged adult children do not want to have to cut their parents off again. It's painful enough the first time. They don't want to risk it by placing their trust in the relationship prematurely. So they do often hang back until they're convinced it's safe enough to reconnect and that reconnection will stick. In the spirit of episode 122, Language Matters, instead of saying, "My child refuses to forgive me," try saying, "My child is afraid to return prematurely." Speaking about your child's ambivalence, sensitivity, or fear reminds you of his vulnerability and humanity, and importantly, it returns your power to you where it belongs. You may not need to be forgiven by anyone other than yourself, but if you can forgive yourself wholeheartedly for being human instead of perfect, or for whatever you feel you need forgiveness for, then you'll be closer to finding compassion for yourself, your adult child, and everyone else who struggles with forgiveness. To go over the main ideas again, there are 3 conditions that make it easier for all of us, not just your adult child or children, to forgive. 1, a good apology. 2, a good outcome. And 3, an end to the offending behavior. Behavior may fall under the umbrella of a theme, so always search underneath incidents of conflict for the theme of those incidents. Also, don't assume your child hasn't forgiven you just because she's still estranged. She may be nervous about returning to closeness because she doesn't want to have to make the choice to estrange herself again. Or there may be other reasons for continued estrangement, none of which have anything to do with forgiveness. The best thing you can do here, I think, is to forgive yourself if needed, and work on understanding the theme of any behavior that's been identified as problematic. That way, you'll be working today on a better relationship with your adult child tomorrow. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.